The rain fell in heavy sheets the day they buried Lily Whittaker, a relentless downpour that mirrored the storm inside her father's heart. Mr. Whittaker, a quiet man whose hands were more accustomed to the rough grain of wood than the softness of a child's hair, stood motionless by the small coffin, his face ashen. His daughter, only 9 years old, was gone, taken in an instant by a reckless driver who hadn't seen her crossing the street. The world moved around him, murmurs of sympathy fading into the background, but he heard none of it. All he could hear was the echo of Lily's laughter, the way she used to hum while drawing pictures at the kitchen table, the way she'd tug his sleeve and say, "Daddy, tell me a story." Now, there would be no more stories. As the funeral director handed him a single white rose to place atop the coffin, Mr. Whittaker hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound diary. Lily's most prized possession. She had carried it everywhere, scribbling in it with the seriousness of a scholar, though she'd never let him read it. "It's private, Daddy," she'd say with a playful grin. Now, he pressed the diary to his lips, breathing in the faint scent of lavender, her favorite, before gently laying it inside the coffin, beside her folded hands. "Keep it safe, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice breaking. It was the last gift he could give her. The days that followed were a blur of silence and shadows. The workshop where Mr. Whittaker once crafted furniture stood untouched, sawdust settling like snow. He avoided Lily's room, unable to face the stuffed animals she'd arranged so carefully, the half-finished drawings still scattered on her desk. Grief was a weight he carried in his bones, a constant ache that no amount of tears could wash away. Then, 3 weeks after the funeral, an envelope arrived. The return address was the funeral home. His stomach twisted as he tore it open, his eyes scanning the typed words. Due to an oversight, a sealed bag of personal effects was not placed in the coffin. We must reopen it to return them. Mr. Whittaker's hands shook. The thought of seeing Lily's coffin again, of disturbing her rest, made him sick. But something deeper, something he couldn't name, tugged at him. With a numb nod, he agreed. When he arrived at the cemetery, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth. The funeral director, a somber man in a black suit, led him to the freshly disturbed grave. As the workers carefully lifted the coffin lid, Mr. Whittaker's breath caught. There, beside Lily's still form, lay the diary. But something was wrong. It wasn't as he'd left it. The leather was slightly frayed, the pages curled at the edges as if someone had been flipping through them, and most unsettling of all, it was slightly open, as if inviting him to read. The moment Mr. Whittaker saw the diary lying slightly open in the coffin, a cold shiver ran down his spine. It made no sense. He had placed it carefully, closed beside Lily's hands, and yet now it looked as though it had been moved, even read. His first instinct was to reach for it, but guilt clawed at him. Hadn't he promised himself he would never invade her private thoughts? But then, a darker thought crept in. What if someone else had? The funeral director noticed his hesitation and asked if everything was all right, but Mr. Whittaker could only nod mutely, his fingers twitching at his sides. The workers finished their task, securing the personal effects bag inside the coffin, but before they could close it again, Mr. Whittaker's hand shot out almost on its own. "Wait," he whispered, his voice rough. He reached inside, his fingers brushing the cool leather of the diary, and as he lifted it, a single folded page slipped loose, fluttering to the ground. The funeral director bent to pick it up, but Mr. Whittaker was faster, snatching it with a sudden urgency that surprised even himself. The workers exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing as he clutched the diary to his chest, his heart pounding, like a trapped animal. That night, alone in the dim glow of his kitchen lamp, Mr. Whittaker stared at the diary on the table, its presence both comforting and terrifying. He traced the embossed letters on the cover, Lily's thoughts, and remembered how she would curl up in her favorite chair, scribbling away with the concentration of a novelist. He had always respected her privacy, never once peeking, but now, with her gone, the diary felt like the last thread connecting them. Taking a deep breath, he opened it, flipping past doodles of sunflowers and cats until his eyes landed on the first entry. What he saw made his breath catch. It wasn't a child's scattered musings. It was a letter. To him. Dear Daddy. It began in Lily's looping handwriting. I know you think I don't notice, but I do. I hear you crying at night when you think I'm asleep. I wish I could hug you and tell you it's okay, but I don't want to embarrass you. So I'm writing it here instead. Mr. Whitaker's vision blurred as he turned the page, each entry revealing a depth of understanding far beyond her years. She wrote about his tired hands, how she wanted to buy him new tools so he wouldn't have to work so hard. She wrote about her mother, how she sometimes dreamed of her smiling but could never quite remember her face. And then, near the end, an entry dated the day before the accident. I had a strange dream last night. Mom was there, and she told me it was almost time to go, but she said not to worry. You wouldn't be alone. She said someone would come, and when they knock, you have to answer. Mr. Whitaker's hands trembled. What did it mean? Was it just a child's imagination, or something more? He flipped to the very last page where a single sentence was scrawled in shaky letters, as if written in a hurry. Listen for the knocking. Daddy, promise me. Just as he read those words, a sound cut through the silence of the house. 3 sharp knocks on the front door. The knocking seemed to echo through the entire house, sharp and deliberate, sending a jolt through Mr. Whitaker's body as if he had been struck by lightning. For a moment, he sat frozen, staring at the door from his seat at the kitchen table, the diary still open in his hands, Lily's words burning in his mind. Listen for the knocking, Daddy. Promise me. His first thought was that it must be a neighbor, or perhaps the funeral director with some forgotten formality. But the hour was late, far too late for any ordinary visitor. The air in the house felt heavy, charged with something he couldn't name. And his pulse roared in his ears as he slowly pushed back his chair and stood, his legs unsteady beneath him. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent, and he forced himself to move, each step toward the door feeling like wading through deep water. His hand hovered over the doorknob, his breath shallow before he finally turned it and pulled the door open, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Standing on the porch was a woman he had never seen before. Her dark hair, damp from the rain that had begun to fall again, her eyes wide and searching as they locked onto his. She was clutching something small and soft against her chest, a teddy bear, its fur worn and familiar. Mr. Whitaker's breath caught. It was Lily's bear, the one she had lost years ago during a trip to the park, the one she had cried over, for weeks before finally accepting it was gone forever. The woman's lips parted, and when she spoke her voice was quiet but steady, as if she had rehearsed these words 1,000 times. Mr. Whitaker, she said, my name is Clara. I was there when your daughter passed. I was holding her hand. The world seemed to tilt around him, the edges of his vision darkening for a moment before snapping back into focus. Clara hesitated, then held out the bear, her fingers trembling slightly. She asked me to give this to you. She said you'd know what it meant. Mr. Whitaker reached out, his hand shaking as he took the bear, the fabric soft beneath his fingers, the faint scent of Lily's strawberry shampoo still clinging to it after all this time. His knees threatened to buckle and he gripped the doorframe to steady himself, his mind racing. How was this possible? How could this bear, lost so long ago, be here now? And why had Lily spoken of it in her final moments? Clara seemed to sense his turmoil because she took a small step forward, her expression softening. There's more, she said quietly. Lily told me something else. She said to tell you that the lake is still waiting and that it's okay to go back. The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. The lake. Their special place where he had taken Lily every summer since she was a baby, where they would sit on the dock and skip stones until the sun dipped below the trees. He hadn't been back since her death. The thought of going without her was unbearable. But now, here was this stranger, repeating words that could have come only from Lily herself. Clara shifted on her feet, her gaze dropping for a moment before meeting his again. "I know this is a lot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I wouldn't blame you if you shut the door right now, but I promised her I'd deliver this message and I couldn't leave without seeing it through." Mr. Whitaker stared at her, his mind reeling, the diary's final entry flashing in his thoughts. "Someone new will come. Please listen to the knocking." Was this what Lily had meant? Was Clara the one she had foreseen? The questions spun in his head, but beneath the confusion, beneath the grief that still threatened to swallow him whole, there was something else, a tiny flicker of something like hope, fragile but undeniable. He tightened his grip on the bear, then stepped back, holding the door open wider. "Come inside," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please. I think we need to talk." The moment Clara stepped inside, the house seemed to exhale, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath for years. Mr. Whitaker led her to the kitchen, his movements slow and deliberate, every nerve in his body alive with a strange mix of dread and something almost like anticipation. He gestured for her to sit at the worn wooden table, the same table where Lily had done her homework, where she'd laughed over pancakes on Sunday mornings, and Clara settled into the chair with a quiet grace, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the teddy bear she'd returned to him. Mr. Whitaker hesitated before sitting across from her, his eyes never leaving her face, searching for answers in the lines of her expression. The silence between them was thick, charged with unspoken questions. But it was Clara who finally broke it, her voice so soft it was almost swallowed by the hum of the refrigerator. "I was the night nurse on duty when Lily was brought in," she began, her gaze dropping to her hands. "She was conscious for a little while, just long enough to—" Her throat worked as she swallowed hard, and Mr. Whitaker saw the glint of tears in her eyes before she quickly blinked them away. "She was so brave. She wasn't scared, not even then. She held my hand and told me about you." Mr. Whitaker's chest tightened, his fingers curling into fists on the tabletop. He didn't know if he could bear to hear this, to picture his daughter in those final moments, but some desperate, clawing part of him needed to know. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Clara lifted her head, her eyes meeting his, and when she spoke, her words were careful, measured, as if she understood the weight of what she was sharing. "She talked about the lake," Clara said, "about how you'd skip stones together, how you'd always let her win. She said you hadn't gone back since her mother died. Not really, not the way you used to, that it hurt too much." A sharp ache lanced through Mr. Whitaker's ribs. Lily had noticed that too. He thought he'd hidden it so well, the way his hands would shake when they passed the turnoff to the lake, the way he'd make excuses to avoid it even on the hottest summer days. But Lily had seen right through him, just like she always had. Clara hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, its edges frayed from handling. "She gave me this, too," she said, sliding it across the table. "She made me promise to give it to you when the time was right." Mr. Whitaker's hands trembled as he picked up the paper, unfolding it with painstaking care. Inside, in Lily's unmistakable handwriting, was a single sentence. "Daddy, it's okay to be happy again." The words blurred as his vision swam with tears, and he pressed his palm to his mouth, a ragged breath escaping him. How could she have known? How could she have understood the guilt that had been eating him alive? The belief that moving forward would somehow mean leaving her behind? Clara's voice pulled him back, gentle but firm. "She also told me about the diary," she said, nodding toward the leather-bound book still lying open on the table. "She said you'd find it, that you'd know what to do when you did." Mr. Whitaker stared at her, a chill running down his spine. "But how?" he rasped. "How could she have known I'd—" He cut himself off, the truth dawning on him with sudden, startling clarity. The diary hadn't been moved by accident. The final entry, the knocking, Clara's arrival, it was all connected, all part of something Lily had somehow set into motion. Clara leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. "I don't have all the answers," she admitted. "But I do know that your daughter wanted you to keep living. Not just existing, not just going through the motions, but really living. And I think she brought us together for a reason." Mr. Whitaker studied her face, the kindness in her eyes, the quiet strength in the set of her shoulders, and for the first time since Lily's death he felt something shift inside him, like a door creaking open after being locked for years. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know why the universe had sent Clara to him, or what any of this truly meant. But as he looked down at the note in his hands, at the words his daughter had left for him, he realized one thing with absolute certainty. Lily was still guiding him, still watching over him, just as she always had. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start listening. The weight of Lily's words, "It's okay to be happy again," hung in the air between them, so palpable that Mr. Whitaker half expected to see them etched into the walls. He ran his thumb over the note again, the paper fragile under his touch, as if it might dissolve into dust if he pressed too hard. Clara sat quietly across from him, giving him space to process, her hands folded neatly on the table, but her presence was like a lighthouse in the storm of his thoughts, steady, unwavering. He wanted to ask her 1,000 questions. Why you? How did Lily know? What am I supposed to do now? But the words tangled in his throat, knotted by grief and something else, something like fear. Fear of moving forward. Fear of betraying Lily's memory by daring to smile again. Fear that if he let go of the pain, even for a second, he might forget the sound of her voice. Clara seemed to sense his hesitation. She reached out slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, and placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, her grip firm but gentle. "She loved you so much," she said softly. "That's all she talked about in those last moments. How much she loved you, how she didn't want you to be sad. She made me promise to remind you of that, no matter how hard it was for you to hear." Mr. Whitaker's breath hitched, and for a moment he couldn't speak. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second a reminder of time slipping away, of a world that kept moving even when his had stopped. He thought of the lake, of the way Lily would splash in the shallows, her laughter ringing across the water. He hadn't been back since the accident. The idea of going alone had felt like a betrayal. But now, with Clara's hand on his and Lily's, words burning in his mind, he wondered if staying away was the real betrayal. "She left something else for you," Clara said suddenly, pulling a small key from her pocket. "She told me you'd know where it goes." Mr. Whitaker stared at it, his pulse quickening. It was a tiny, tarnished thing, the kind that might fit a diary or a jewelry box. Then it hit him, the wooden chest. Years ago, he'd built Lily a small chest to keep her treasures in, and she'd hidden it under her bed, giggling as she declared it top secret. He'd never asked what she kept inside. Now, he stood so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor, his heart pounding as he moved toward Lily's room for the first time since her death. Clara followed silently, her footsteps light behind him. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and the scent of lavender and crayons washed over him, so familiar it stole his breath. Everything was exactly as Lily had left it. Her bed neatly made, her stuffed animals arranged in a row, her favorite blue sweater draped over the chair. The sight was like a punch to the gut, but he forced himself to step inside, dropping to his knees beside the bed. His fingers brushed against dust as he reached underneath, and then, there it was, the chest, just as he remembered. He pulled it out, his hand shaking, and set it on the bed. The key fit perfectly. Inside, nestled atop a pile of drawings and trinkets, was a photograph. Mr. Whitaker lifted it with trembling fingers and his vision blurred. It was a picture of him and Lily at the lake, taken last summer. She was mid-laugh, her hair wild in the wind, and he was smiling down at her, his face softer than he remembered it ever being. Taped to the back of the photo was a slip of paper, with 3 words in Lily's handwriting: "Remember us happy." The photograph in Mr. Whitaker's hands felt like a relic from another life, one where laughter came easily and grief was just a shadow at the edges of happiness, not the all-consuming force it had become. He traced the outline of Lily's face with his thumb, the paper smooth beneath his touch, as if by memorizing every detail he could somehow bring her back, if only for a moment. Clara stood beside him, her presence quiet but anchoring, her eyes fixed on the photograph with an expression he couldn't quite name, something between sorrow and wonder. The chest held more beneath the picture, a collection of small, seemingly insignificant treasures that Lily had deemed worthy of safekeeping. A pebble from the lake, worn smooth by water and time, a dried wildflower, its petals brittle but still clinging to a hint of purple, a ribbon from her mother's hair, its color faded but its meaning unmistakable. Each item was a thread in the tapestry of her short life, a silent testament to the love she had carried with her. Mr. Whitaker lifted the ribbon, the fabric whispering against his calloused fingers, and suddenly he was back in the hospital room, years ago, holding his wife's hand as she slipped away, promising her through tears that he would take care of their daughter. He had kept that promise, or at least he had tried. But now, faced with the remnants of Lily's joy, he couldn't help but wonder if he had failed her in the end. Had she known how much he loved her? Had she felt it, even in those final moments? The question clawed at him, sharp and unrelenting, until Clara's voice broke through the storm of his thoughts. "She wanted you to have these," she said softly, nodding toward the chest. "She told me they were reminders, not of what you lost, but of what you had." Her words settled over him like a balm, soothing the raw edges of his guilt, if only slightly. He set the ribbon back in the chest with reverent care, his gaze drifting to the window, where the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in months, the sight didn't fill him with bitterness. Instead, it stirred something else, a fragile, tentative hope. Lily had left him a map, piece by piece, the diary, the note, the chest, the photograph. And now, Clara, standing beside him with a quiet strength that felt like a gift he hadn't earned. He turned to her, searching her face for answers he wasn't sure she could give. "Why you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Out of everyone in the world, why did she choose you to deliver this?" Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her sweater. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think it's because I understood." She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I lost someone too, my brother 5 years ago. It nearly destroyed me. But Lily, she talked to me about him, about things she couldn't have known. She said he was at peace, that he wanted me to remember him with joy, not grief." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Mr. Whitaker saw the tears she had been holding back spill over, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. In that moment, she wasn't a stranger anymore. She was just like him, broken, searching, trying to find her way in a world that had taken too much. Something shifted inside him then, a door creaking open in a part of his heart he had thought sealed forever. He didn't have the words to explain it. Not yet. But as he looked at Clara, at the way the morning light caught in her hair, at the quiet understanding in her eyes, he realized that maybe, just maybe, Lily hadn't just been trying to comfort him. Maybe she had been trying to lead him home. The morning sun streamed through Lily's bedroom window, painting golden stripes across the floorboards as Mr. Whitaker carefully closed the wooden chest. His fingers lingered on the carved lid, remembering the afternoon he'd made it. How Lily had danced around his workshop covered in sawdust, declaring it the most beautiful treasure chest in the world. Now it sat heavy with memories, each artifact inside a whispered conversation from the daughter he could no longer hold. Clara stood quietly by the door, giving him space yet remaining present, her shadow stretching long across Lily's neatly made bed. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who had known profound loss, who understood that some griefs were too vast for words. Mr. Whitaker straightened slowly, his joints protesting after hours kneeling by the bed, and found himself looking not at Lily's empty room, but at Clara's face, the way her eyelashes caught the light, the faint freckles across her nose that seemed suddenly familiar, though he couldn't say why. He carried the chest to the kitchen, setting it gently on the table beside Lily's diary. The two objects seemed to belong together, the locked secrets and the freely given ones. Clara followed, her footsteps light on the hardwood, and without thinking, Mr. Whitaker filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The mundane act of making tea felt startlingly normal, like the first breath after being underwater too long. As the water heated, he turned to Clara, really looked at her for the first time since she'd appeared on his doorstep like an answer to a prayer he'd never dared speak. "You said Lily talked about your brother," he began, watching her face carefully. "What else did she tell you?" Clara accepted the mug he offered, wrapping her hands around it as if for warmth. "She said he was with my mother now," she said softly. "That they were waiting, but not in a hurry. That they wanted me to." Her voice caught. "To love the world enough for all of us." The words hung in the air between them, and Mr. Whitaker felt something unlock in his chest. Not a sudden healing, but the first loosening of a knot he'd thought permanent. Later, when the tea was gone and the morning had worn into afternoon, Mr. Whitaker found himself standing at the front door with Clara, neither quite ready to say goodbye. The teddy bear sat on the hall table, watching them with its worn button eyes. "The lake," Mr. Whitaker heard himself say. I think I should go back." Clara nodded as if she'd been expecting this. "Lily would like that," she said simply. Then, surprising them both, Mr. Whitaker added, "You could come, if you wanted." The invitation hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Clara studied his face, the lines of grief that had begun to soften, the eyes that held more light than when she'd first arrived. "I'd like that," she said at last, and when she smiled, really smiled, Mr. Whitaker saw not just Clara, but Lily too, in the way her nose scrunched, in the spark of joy that lit her eyes. It wasn't a replacement, never that, but it was a continuation, a thread picked up and carried. Forward. As he watched Clara walk down the path toward her car, the late afternoon sun gilding her hair, Mr. Whitaker placed one hand on the diary and the other on the treasure chest. The house around him was still quiet, still filled with Lily's absence, but the silence no longer felt like an ending. Somewhere beyond the window, a bird began to sing, clear and bright and insistent. Mr. Whitaker took a deep breath, and for the first time since the accident, the air didn't catch in his lungs like broken glass. There would be hard days ahead. He knew. Grief wasn't something you moved on from. It was something you moved forward with. But Lily had left him a map, and now, finally, he thought he might be ready to follow it. Back to the lake, back to life, back to the business of remembering. Not just with sorrow, but with love, and maybe, just maybe, with happiness too.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.